Live from our newsroom, it's the Hard Times Podcast. With Bill Conway and Matt Sankum.
I want your take on, who are the PMRC of today? Because every punk kid out there knows the words PMRC. They know that story.
I would argue with that, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, there were PMRCs in the past and there will be in the future. I wish when I was on Oprah debating Tipper Gore and whatnot, having to do all those interviews because the criminal charges about their real motives for attacking our music, which they were a bunch of religious bigots, basically. Tipper Gore was the liberal feminist, she called herself, ha ha ha, with the big hair and the supposedly hip husband and stuff who thought this would help make him president and everything. All the people around her were like Susan Baker, the wife of that gangster, James Baker, who was a really powerful Secretary of State, fixer, and whatnot. And one of the most evil people in American 20th century history behind the scenes. But anyway, and she, in addition to being a holy roller, where you would kneel on the floor and pray if you went to visit her, she was on the board of directors of Focus on the Family. Still one of the worst religious right hate groups in the United States. And when Tipper got her husband to hold Senate hearings on evil music with Tipper and Susan Baker and a couple of other society ladies announcing the PMRC and how awful this stuff is, and we call on labels to, quote, reassess the contracts of artists who promote devil worship, drugs, crime, gangs, homosexuality, suicide. They wanted not just the Tipper sticker, they wanted a red flag for gays too, which all the gay activists who yelled at me when Gore didn't get in and W did in 2000, that it was all the fault of Ralph Nader and the Green Party. I had to remind them of who would have been the first lady and where her priorities were, and that she was lockstep with a bunch of really active homophobes and stuff. But only recently, there's a new movie out about Billie Holiday. And it's not like Lady Sings the Blues, where I first heard of her as a teenager, where Diana Ross, I think, played her in a biopic of this tragic talent who died from drugs and stuff. And that's mostly what people think of her. But this filmmaker's, and I should have learned his name, his whole thing is, people don't realize how important she was to the civil rights movement and how much guts she really had, pointing to her signature song, Strange Fruit, which to my utter horror, I have a dozen Billie Holiday albums and it wasn't on any of them. And finally, it shows the actress playing Billie Holiday performing the song after all these people say she can't perform it tonight or there's going to be arrests. And the guy who ran what was then the drug wars and prohibition and everything else, Harry Anslinger, was very open. He wanted not just to make an example out of her because she was a junkie, but to make her the example to try and get rid of that song because it was un-American and was promoting unrest. Strange Fruit is a very graphic description of a lynching. Eyewitness description of a lynching. And the lyrics are so no holds barred and explicit, it could be punk or what Tipper and crew and others dismissed as gangster rap. When the people doing the so-called gangster rap, everybody from NWA to Ice-T to Ghetto Boys and Public Enemy got ghettoized with that too. As of, hey, we're just telling you what goes on in our neighborhoods that you people don't know about, and it's about time you did. Chuck D said, I think we are the real CNN, or he said the new CNN. I can't remember which, but, I took that comment very seriously too, because in the punk, the hardcore underground, since that punk is such a reactionary, high adrenaline kind of music, it attracts extreme people from all sides, including many people who were either far to the right or more likely, really anti-political, apolitical. Jello just preaches too much. He's too preachy. And I kind of got a little self-conscious of that, trying to find more clever, less preachy ways to say what I wanted to say, both on the words and on stage. I don't think I dialed it back much, but it was there. And then by the time Public Enemy hit, I'm mostly doing spoken word, which is all infotainment, including the people on planes, but not like as long as what you describe in your expose. But I thought, Chuck D is right, and I am never going to be worried about being too preachy again, as mass media is bought out, dumbed down, to the point where people even vote for Donald Trump now and stuff and believe that dude. Somebody does have to be the real CNN. We all do, in a way, even if it's one-on-one with somebody who's starting to spout QAnon shit and whatnot, or it's kind of starting to go in that direction. It's somebody you care about, somebody you know well. You don't just run off and blog to an echo chamber of critters that already agree with you. You talk to them eye to eye.
Have you had anyone in your personal circle?
I'm not going to say who, but yeah, and some of you wouldn't know anyway. But we've had our discussions and may have more. But my hope is that you say long enough and could try and appeal to what the person what they care about and stuff, and appeal to their hearts and their own situation, and be ready to be put down as a snowflake, a faggot, a pea snake, a queer, whatever.
A pea snake?
Oh yeah, that's still around too. That was a big. It was bashing people who opposed the Vietnam War.
Oh,
and
I didn't know that.
They pulled it back out again to people who opposed the Gulf War and the Iraq War and everything else.
Okay.
And the NIK at the end is supposed to imply you're some kind of. You're not just a faggot. You're a commie faggot.
Ah, okay. Now I know.
That. What are you? Some kind of socialist? Actually, I am. What? You want to go move to Venezuela? No, that's not really socialism, is it? And stuff, but all kinds of stuff like that can turn the stomach. But you hope that some of them, maybe 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years later, it'll finally wake up. Hey, wait a minute. Rush Limbaugh is wrong. This is all crap, and I don't want to run around being racist and bashing immigrants when it's the corporations based here that are shipping my jobs overseas and stuff. You can get through to people. I mean, that was one of the reasons when there was that controversy going on with the arrest over the contents of the Frankenchrist album, me and 4 other people in distribution chain, but they boiled it down to me and one other person who had worked at Alternative Tentacles as the main targets to make an example out of somebody, because this is the first time they'd ever put somebody on trial for the contents of a music album ever. This was before Two Live Crew or anybody else. And it wasn't even for Too Drunk to Fuck either. Although there was stuff where the stores got raided over that in England and Australia. But, and yes, it was a preacher behind it in Brisbane in Australia.
Okay, wait, I have to ask you one quick question. So I played in punk bands. I'm a young guy. I have a bunch of friends who play in punk bands. When we do shit, no one cares. When you did this stuff, people cared. It sounded like it was a fucking nightmare, right? They're raiding your house.
Oh, no, it's the value and shock value, and sometimes it has repercussions.
Right.
And yeah, that whole thing took a lot out of me and derailed me for 1.5 years and everything. Figuring the whole industry was on my back on this, and I couldn't fuck up, which was a little bit of an emotional, melodramatic exaggeration, I suppose. But, as soon as I found out, oh yeah, my legal guy calls me, oh yeah, you're charged in that thing now. Oh, what do I do? Pay him $100? He was like, no, you don't understand. CBS is calling me. CNN is calling me. Oh shit. I'm Tipper's pigeon. All right, fine. Game fucking on, bitches. I will expose you, which I did. I knew it would be my one chance to this day that corporate McNews would actually allow me to speak freely and use what I said in their news and stuff. So I tried to choose it carefully and nail people who needed to be nailed, including Tipper Gore, linking Tipper Gore to anti-Semites on Oprah when it wasn't just Ice-T who was there, it was Rabbi Abraham Cooper from the
Yeah.
Wiesenthal Center, who was there because of anti-Semitic stuff, both coming from both Ice Cube apparently and Axl Rose. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. You don't want to ally yourself with this woman because she is allied with people like Back in Control Center in LA, whose own little manual says that the Jewish Star of David is a symbol of the occult.
Mm-hmm.
And he perked up at that. So and on those shows, I wore a suit and tie. Halloween today. Okay, I'm going to disguise myself as a respectable citizen and a nice boy. And if even one housewife out there who has nothing better to do but watch these talk shows in the middle of the afternoon is then going to think twice about putting their kid in an institution because they're listening to punk or metal. I mean, right now, Paris Hilton, of all people, is trying to expose this horrible place that's kind of, I don't know, I hope it's not like what they're trying to do to Navalny in Russia now or the Uyghurs in China. But there's a place outside of Provo, Utah called Provo Canyon School. And people would have their kids actually abducted, and sent there. And they wouldn't let them out until they were cured of, whatever the parents didn't like about them and stuff. And I've interviewed people who've been through this thing, and and what Paris Hilton is saying about it, she mentioned drugging people too, which the people I interviewed said no, they didn't do that when I was there. They just did all kinds of other horrible things.
Is it like gay conversion therapy, or what is it?
It was basic. It wasn't just aimed at gays, though. It was aimed at anything that the parents thought wasn't right and wouldn't make them into a nice, respectable citizen. There was a really famous former NFL quarterback and broadcaster whose son was in there. One of the people I talked to was also in there. He said, oh, yeah, that guy finally got out, and a little bit later he tried to rob a gas station. So Jenny Garth, of all people, from what is that, Beverly Hills 90210? That's where she came from. Anyway, she did a movie exposing those kind of institutions that was pretty well done, that never would have been able to be a TV movie if it wasn't, wasn't her in it and backing and everything, but it was well, including one where when the guy's insurance, they put him back out of there and he was mentally troubled with depression, and then he killed himself right after he got out in the fictional movie about these places. But keep an eye, for once, keep an eye on Paris Hilton, of all people, as she really tries to take on and expose Provo Canyon, because there's a lot of other places like that.
Okay, yeah, I'll check it out. Thanks. Okay, so the Oprah appearance, you really did make the most of it. It's actually one of those videos that still gets shared around from time to time as people saying, look at this guy. There's always these videos of, look at this guy who was telling the truth before the rest of society was telling the truth, right? There's always like the video.
Well, it wasn't just me. I mean, Ice-T is great on there because Oprah then, it's either bouncing ball on the screen or something, and a line about fucking a girl with a flashlight. And then Oprah just stares at him with this dagger-eyed Oprah stare I knew well from the earlier time I was on with Tipper Gore, and Oprah just wouldn't even let me talk and stuff. And Ice, who handles these talk shows better than just about anybody I've ever seen, scoots to the front of his chair so he even looks like he's commanding. Yeah, well, some people like to do it with a flashlight. And Oprah didn't know what to do. She just stopped there and kind of whatever. And I learned from the other time, when every time I tried to say anything, Oprah would use this off-camera hand gesture she would use as to who was going to get the mic and the camera on him and stuff. And if I tried to say anything, she'd switch to Tipper Gore. Or whatever, or this conservative psychiatrist or something was on there too, whose main message to everybody was buy my book. But so I knew what she was going to do, and this time I had caught Tipper in a weekly magazine out of Nashville, I believe, an interview with a journalist named Keith Gordon, where she did her whole line, oh, I'm just a nice feminist liberal lady. I'm not trying to censor anybody. And then, but what about Jello Biafra's trial? Well, she says, I'd like to take credit for it, which was exactly the opposite of when she was asked about that in another interview. I think it was Philadelphia Inquirer right before that, where she said, oh, I respect Jello Biafra. Well, thanks for the respect, lady. You know, the only reason I was picked to be the pigeon in LA, the prosecutor admitted, oh, we believe this is a cost-effective way of sending a message. And then he admitted to an LA Weekly reporter, who was Don Bowles, of all people, who was working at the LA Weekly at the time, that he had a whole file of other musicians they convicted me and got their legal precedent. They were going to go probably after Ozzy Osbourne and Prince and Judas Priest, AC/DC, and others. Guns N' Roses hadn't quite, and really start doing the whole Joe McCarthy religious right crusade, right in conjunction with Attorney General Ed Meese's anti-porn crusade and stuff that was being laughed at by 10 times as many people as those who supported it. But this cynical LA DA, who, you know, a Democrat, mind you, a big city Democrat like Feinstein or Newsom or the current mayor here, London Greed or whatever. But, as Frank Zappa put it, this is election year bullshit. He's just trying to get his name in the paper. And sure enough, the guy ran for mayor of LA later. He lasted one term before he was obviously incompetent. He got knocked off by Villaraigosa. Anyway, so the first time I was on, I wasn't allowed to talk. And Oprah just looked at, well, your stuff is so obscene, it can't even stock to these stores, blah, blah, blah. The moral of the story being, make sure one of your friends doesn't get backstage and show Oprah the Frankenchrist poster right before she goes on the air. This is somebody who said in her autobiography that the answer to all life's questions can be found in the Bible. So, no wonder she was so partial to Tipper Gore. And I was so shocked they asked me to be on again. Don't you remember who I am? You were hostile to me too, Ms. Producer. Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Oh, great. Here we go.
We thought it was the other Jello Biafra.
Exactly. Then, he probably came too, but they wouldn't let him in. He didn't understand. But so he could complain he wasn't this. Why are they saying all these things about me? I'd rather be patted on the head by Evan McMullen than these people. I don't know. But anyway, so I got the Keith Gordon article, put it in my pocket, and confronted her, knowing she would probably lie and denying saying it. And of course, she did deny it. She did lie. Oh, yes, I actually have the article right here, and I read it to her on the air. And the crowd begins booing and hissing at her. And I said, what kind of example do you think you're setting for your own kids when they see their mom lying on national television? And Oprah, to save her pal, quickly got the hand gesture out and said, oh, well, I'm sure you too have been misquoted at times, haven't you, Jello? And now a word from our sponsor. And that was the last words I was ever allowed to say on Oprah Winfrey.